The information featured in this program is general in nature and should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.
Good evening and welcome to the property edition of Your Money, Your Call. I'm Michael Teys. Tonight, as usual, you can ask the panel any question you like about property investing. So if you'd like to join the conversation, call us now on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. And while we wait for the phones to ring, let's see what's making news in property today. While 2014 saw house prices in Australia's capital cities continue to increase, rents lagged behind. According to CoreLogic's RP Data's latest rental report, house rents across the capital cities increased by just 1.2% over the year, with the median rent stagnating at $430 per week in the final quarter. The slowing rental market was also reflected in the performance of rental units last quarter. And the one-time bearish strategist at Morgan Stanley, Gerard Minnick, has addressed his housing market concerns in his first expansive interview in 18 months. He's told the Australian Financial Review, when we get across-the-board unemployment, then we'll get an across-the-board downturn in house prices. It's just a matter of time. Minnick's comments came just ahead of ANZ announcing its latest survey that showed job advertisements rose in a further 1.8% in December to record their 7th consecutive monthly rise in seasonally adjusted terms. Job ads have now trended higher for 14 months and are up 11.4% over the year to December. The ANZ chief economist, Warren Hogan, said, "The good news is that the economy continues to produce new employment opportunities. The bad news is that this has not quite been enough to counteract the flow of new workers into the economy, plus the ongoing loss of jobs in certain sectors." With me tonight to discuss these and other matters are buyer's agent Simon Pressley and Damian Collins of Momentum Wealth. Simon and Damian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael.
And a happy New Year to both of you.
Likewise. Yeah.
So as we kick off the year, there's some news of increasing job prospects for some people, which I think is fantastic given the unemployment problems that have been reported towards the end of last year. Simon, your views on how that impacts on the property markets generally?
Well, economic development we've always maintained as a precursor to property price growth. In fact, the number one thing that drives property prices is economic development. If you just look at Sydney over the last 2 years, we're looking at some statistics just last week. 52,000 jobs were created in Sydney in 2014, of a total of 134,000 in Australia. So there's no coincidence that you had the jobs growth in Sydney and the price growth that went with it.
Interesting, yeah. And in Brisbane, your hometown?
Brisbane, from a jobs growth perspective, wasn't fantastic. I think there was about 8,000 jobs created in Brisbane last year. But the good thing is it's positive growth, and I think unemployment rates in isolation can be sometimes a little bit rubbery and misleading about what's really occurring. As long as you're creating some jobs, or your economy's heading in the right direction. Good.
And the election, how does that affect the local property market?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting. The fact that it's been a snap election.
It's a quick one.
We haven't got months of speculation and negativity and everyone with hands in pockets for a long period of time. So
we can all be thankful for that.
That's a good thing. But I think the outlook for Queensland's economy is actually an exceptionally healthy one. If we start at the top of the state, you've got infrastructure projects all the way down that are likely to kick off at different stages over the next couple of years. There's a big alumina project in Weipa. Cairns has got port and airport expansions.
Well, you might be on Campbell Newman's team before long. Keep talking it up. Damian, you're from the West.
I am.
How are things over there?
Look, unemployment's still relatively low, even lower than most of the eastern states, but there's no doubt it's started to pick up a bit. Interesting, we obviously track it very closely in our client base, and a few people have lost jobs. Most have got them again. The ones who seem to be suffering are engineers. That's the sector that's, because there's not a lot of front-end work, that's the sector that's suffered the most. But overall, look, the economy is still tracking along okay. The latest gross state product per state, WA, was still the fastest growing state in the nation. But look, the confidence is down at the moment, just because of what's going on in the mining sector.
Western Australian confidence being down means that you're still robust and buoyant about most things.
Well, it's a pretty confident state.
It's a pretty tough place, isn't it?
Ex-Victorian, so I've noticed the difference over there. But look, it has certainly this time around dented confidence a bit. And
I always claim my Queensland heritage when I'm in Perth, because they seem to hate Queenslanders a little less than they do other people in the east.
Just marginally, not a lot. Just marginally.
So as we start the property investing year, Damian, you're advising clients all the time on where to buy property. What's the top of your mind at the moment?
Look, I think in most locations around Australia, you're not going to see a standout year in 2015. In the west, we think it's going to be fairly flat. Maybe a couple of % growth. Certainly in Sydney, still got a little bit of legs in it, but it's coming to an end in terms of the capital growth that's been over here. It's just getting to unaffordable levels, and with it such an investor-dominated market, nearly 50% of the loans, it's just obviously a sign of a topping out in the market. Certainly Brisbane, in terms of the capital cities, we think will probably be the best performing city around Australia, and Melbourne will do okay. So, but overall, it's not going to be a year for investors to be making significant capital growth rates. Generally, certainly some properties and some individual sub-locations may do particularly well, but as a general rule it won't. And I think it's a good year for investors to be looking to put something in their portfolio that's going to be good for 10 years, not just focused on the next 12 months.
And Simon, I know that one of your adages is it's not where to buy, sorry, it's not when to buy, it's where to buy.
Absolutely.
And on that basis, are you prepared to let us have any of your insight on what's good buying for 2015?
Yeah, well, obviously we're always very particular with intellectual property, Michael, but I think property markets in general have returned to quite a normal cycle. 2014 was the story of Sydney, but just about everywhere else around Australia was back to normal, and I think 2015 is going to be more of the same there. The industries, we focus a lot on industry drivers, and I think tourism-related locations, agriculture to a degree, and construction. And I think the mining boom has been replaced with the construction boom. So they're the sectors for investors to really watch.
Good. All right, well, we've got our first caller tonight. I think we've got Pauline on the phone. Is that right, Pauline?
Yes, hi.
Hi, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Good. How can we help you?
Well, it's really a question for you. I'm a body corporate secretary with a block of units in Toowoomba.
You're a lucky person then?
And it's an older block.
It's a good salary, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Now, I've got a dispute between residents with all the units have a glass sliding door on them, and they also have a sliding security screen door as well. And this particular unit, they've gone and put a different door on. There was a dispute a few years ago with who was going to pay for it, and the owner was told it wasn't common property, so he put a different one on, and it looks quite sort of, doesn't look good, and, we would like him to replace it because it's different from the other units.
Okay.
So he won't pay for it, and I looked up the Queensland community management legislation for what is actually common property, and it's a bit ambiguous because it says external windows and doors that border onto common property are the responsibility of the body corporate, and it talks about doors and door fixtures. Now, I want to know whether a sliding security screen is a door fixture, or are they talking about locks and handles?
Yeah, look, Pauline, your question's a common one, and a lot of disputes in body corporate centre around a misunderstanding or a lack of clarity about what is common property and what's not. It's important for viewers to realise that the laws are different about these things in every state and territory in Australia. which is our way, of course, to make things as complex as we can. But we have 8 jurisdictions for strata title property in Australia, and they're all different. Now, in Queensland, it's going to depend whether you're a townhouse type development or a unit block. But generally, the starting point is that the door, the window and the screen will all be common property, and therefore the responsibility of the body corporate. So unless your strata plan says something different, then that's likely to be your position. So the starting point is to go to the plan and then to determine it from there. In terms of making alterations to that, then that should only be done with the consent of the body corporate, of course. So I hope that helps. I won't bother going to the other gentleman on that question because I'm reasonably certain that that's my field, and that'll be the answer that you're looking for, Pauline. So have a look at the website of the government, the Body Corporate Community Management Office in Queensland. It's got some really good information about what common property is and how it should be repaired properly. All right, we'll take our first email now, and that comes from Lana, who wants advice on her second investment property. Lana writes, I currently own a 1-bedroom apartment in Flemington. I have $50,000 in equity and next year would love to buy a second property. I'm wondering where you see value for investors under $350,000. Urban or rural in capital gains, and also decent cash flow, as my current property is still negatively geared. I've owned it for 4 years. All right, panel, there's a good general question to start us off. Damian, you talked before about lack of affordability in Sydney. It's still possible to get property in Sydney under $350,000. What would you be saying about that, and how would you answer our question?
Well, Lana, obviously with a $350,000 budget, you're obviously constrained in a lot of properties in the capital cities, but I'd certainly be focusing on, and you mentioned cash flow, another issue as well, so you might need to go into some regional areas, certainly one in Victoria. Ballarat, the yields are pretty good. You can still get, although it has had a bit of a run, you can get properties in certainly in the 200,000 price bracket. If you go into the capital cities, yeah, you're going to struggle to get, you can get properties for under 350, but you're going to struggle to have a huge selection, but there will be something there. I think one thing to always be aware of, though, it's about the land component value, and even in apartments there is an implied land component value or locational value. So just always be focusing, making sure you're getting enough implied locational land value, so that's what gives you the capital growth. The buildings ultimately, over time, do fall down in value.
All right, and Simon?
Oh, I think, Lana, you'd be first best getting some property investment advice and review your strategy before looking at location. $50,000 equity is a little bit skinny, but hopefully you'll get a bit more growth in your existing Flemington property over, say, the next 12 months. But reviewing your investment strategy and getting a professional look at both your capital and cash flow, you might be surprised what sort of opportunities, and you might have more capacity than what you actually realise. But in regards to capital city versus regional locations, neither's better than the other. There's always going to be good capital cities and good regional locations to invest in.
So, Simon, you're a property buyer's agent and researcher.
Correct.
Tell me how people go about accessing services from a buyer's agent and what a buyer's agent does.
Well, Michael, the buyer's agent service, I guess, is the transaction of sifting through a number of properties that are in a particular market, finding an individual property and negotiating the lowest possible price for a client. The research part of it is done before that, and propertyology, I guess it's akin to what a stockbroker does for a share investor. It's starting this big country called Australia first and foremost, and that will uncover all sorts of investment property opportunities, and then the buyer's agent service of finding the right property in that location.
And how is that service different to a real estate agent?
Well, the real estate agent obviously works for the property owner or the vendor, so they've got a vested interest to talk up features and benefits of a property, and then to try to get the highest price from prospective buyers.
So acting on behalf of the purchaser, you can deal with the agent acting on behalf of the seller and get a good outcome.
A buyer's agent works for the buyer only, yes. Yep.
Good. All right, well, thanks for tuning in. And as usual tonight, we're giving away one of Margaret's books. Every Monday night, the panel chooses one question from either the emails or the calls. And this week, the best email will receive How to Achieve Property Success. All you have to do is call us on 1300 30 34 35 or email property@skynews.com.au with a question, and then make sure you're watching at the end to see if you're tonight's winner. We'll take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll take more of your calls and emails. Welcome back. I'm Michael Teys, and joining me tonight are Simon Pressley, who is a buyer's agent with Propertyology, and Damian Collins of Momentum Wealth. We've been chatting about different aspects of property investment and how we see the year shaping up for you investors. If you have a question or you'd like to ask us, including on my field of strata property law, grab the phone and call us now on 1300 30 34 35, or email us on property@Sky News. Now, before we take the next caller, Simon, did I get that name right?
Close, Michael.
Close.
Yeah, 10
Good.
points for effort.
I'll try again in the next break. Now, we've got Mo on the line. Hi, Mo. You're calling from Gladstone. Hello, Mo? No? We seem to have a problem there. All right, so we'll take Mo's call in a moment when he can call back. For now, we'll take another viewer email. And our questioner asks, please confirm if the current Sydney price boom has exceeded pre-GFC heights across similar sectors. Well, it's short and it's to the point, gentlemen, but I guess it leads us into a discussion about what has been the hottest market in Australia, the Sydney property market. And Simon, I know we were talking before the show about what GFC. How do you answer this question?
Well, it is true. Post-GFC, the 6 or 7 years that's been, Sydney has performed significantly better than the corresponding 6 or 7 years pre-GFC. But it's the only capital city that's done that. I think in times when we've had a Sydney property boom, we can lose sight of the fact that Sydney officially has been the worst performing capital city in Australia since the Sydney 2000 Olympics. Leading up to the GFC, it performed miserably. Obviously, the last couple of years have been spectacular. But they had a lot of catching up to do.
And so the lesson in that is what, Damian?
Well, Sydney this time around is not quite as strong as it was in the early 2000s, but Sydney had a very strong run just after the Olympics up to 2003, and then basically flatlined and barely did inflation rates for another 6 or 7 years thereafter. So, look, the run-up hasn't been as strong this time, but what concerns me, the stronger it goes this time, the longer the hangover is going to be, and the flatline period, because it's just getting to, on all measures, and certainly Sydney's the largest city in Australia. It's got it does have a shortage of a land with all the national parks, so it's always going to be the most expensive, but affordability is really pushing up there. When your median price is over 800,000 and the average wage is actually less than WA and less than Canberra, it's just going to get to a point where prices can't get going up. And as I say, it's been very investor driven this time around as well.
And affordability is the key.
Affordability, you say, is the key, but I guess it also makes the point, doesn't it, that when we talk on this show a lot about diversification, and where you've got properties like markets like Sydney, which are doing these erratic things over long periods of time, it really makes the point that you've got to have your portfolio balanced so you're exposed to a number of different markets at different times.
Much in the same way a share investor would do. They wouldn't have 100% of banking stocks, introduce some different stocks in there.
So it's real, and I guess, Simon, from your point of view, people that come to you are looking for research and are looking for a buyer's agent, so are probably more educated and seasoned than most. A lot of first-time property investors, Damian, you probably agree with me, want to buy in their own backyard, don't they? They want to buy that place that they can drive past and touch and see and feel and think that they can go and fix up if it needs fixing up and that sort of stuff, which is frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, a lot of investors do like to stick to their own backyard, and look, if it's in a good capital city that's got good long-term growth, then it hasn't gone through a really strong period where it's likely to flatline for a long time. If that's what they're comfortable with, I guess that's okay, but often the best property is not in your backyard, and certainly even in the same city, most likely definitely not in the same suburb.
That's right. You've got to buy something that the bulk of people renting are going to want.
Exactly.
As opposed to the emotional side of buying your house and feeling, quite attached to the suburb. All right, well, we're going to take an email while we wait for Mo, and this one comes from Arsham. We are a young family moving from Sydney to Brisbane, looking to see what would be the best suburb for long-term growth in a 10-kilometre range from Brisbane CBD to buy. Also, is it better to buy a house or a unit? And the price range is under $700,000. Well, Damian, I put this on the show because I like to argue with you about houses and units. So I thought we'd just get it on nice and early in the beginning of the year and get it out of the road. So why don't you go first?
Well, actually, one of the suburbs that we like in Brisbane is Nunda, N-U-N-D-H-A, D-A-H. It's got a good train, it's got a good cafe district, and it's certainly one of the areas that we like to buy. In terms of the argument about units versus houses, I'm not against units, and I'm not for houses. What I'm for is a land component value, because that is what goes up. And certainly on a unit, if you could find in a good location, you might find the implied land value of a unit may well be 70–80% of that value, and the building might be only 20–30%. That's okay, perfectly okay. But what I find is that for most units, particularly new ones, is that the implied land component value sometimes is 10 or 20%, and the rest of it's building. Now, buildings depreciate, and you get a depreciation allowance for good reason, because the buildings do go down in value. Sure. So I'm not against units, I'm not for houses, but what I am for is land component value, because that's what makes you money.
And so when you look at a unit block in Nunda,
yep,
tell me how you work out the implied land value content.
Yeah. So if you're looking at a unit, basically we work on depreciated replacement costs. So if we know a two-bedroom unit might cost, say, $200,000 today, and if it's, say, 30 years old, its depreciated implied replacement value may well be somewhere in the order of $70,000, $60,000. Again, it depends what work's been done to it, if it's original condition or not. And then the remaining component is then effectively your implicit land component value. It is a little bit harder on units. It's certainly easier on houses, particularly if there's comparable land sales around. A little bit more difficult on units, but that's the best way, to simply, it's the implicit value after taking away the depreciated replacement costs of the building.
Yeah. And Simon, Brisbane 10k radius, there's plenty to pick from. Nunda is an area that Damian's mentioned. What are your thoughts on houses and units in that circle?
Yeah, it was an interesting question. I took from the question that perhaps they're moving from Sydney to Brisbane, so therefore looking at a principal place of residence. Yeah, yeah. And if I've understood that correctly, then it largely doesn't matter. It's more a personal decision, which is going to be based on lifestyle and proximity to work, and a very personal thing as opposed to a financial thing. Yeah. If it's an investment decision, with $700,000, I'd suggest you've got the whole country to pick from. And wherever you're moving from or to is largely irrelevant. With $700,000, you perhaps could be looking at 2 properties or even 3 properties.
Definitely.
Yeah, specific to Brisbane, look, houses and apartments in different pockets are okay. There is a lot of development underway for new inner-city apartments, predominantly in the 3-kilometre ring from the CBD. We'd be buying apartments in the middle ring, and a couple of pockets where there's houses.
That more out towards Cooperoo?
On the south side, yeah, there's some unit development going on there, but sort of, from that 3 kilometres to, say, about 8-kilometre ring, north and south side of the river.
Good. And what about the land content point that Damian makes? So do you subscribe to that thought?
I have a different view. When the for sale sign goes up, or when we get the valuer to come out to value the asset, with even if we're holding it, they don't value the land component and the building component as 2 separate things. We don't put 2 for sale signs out. So in selecting a dwelling style, first we start with the investor's budget. Second, we look at industry drivers and direct us towards different locations. Once we've picked a location, then we study the supply and demand of different dwelling styles within it. So in some cities, we're only looking for, say, a 2-bedroom apartment. In other locations, we'll only buy a 3 or 4-bedroom house. It does vary.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, I think that's nicely covered that topic. It is, of course, the case that units are now the predominant form of housing being built.
Yes.
So it is here to stay, and I think the rules are changing. I'd like to see some valuation work done on long-term resales of apartments versus houses. I think it would help people in their buying decision. It doesn't seem to be a lot of it around at the moment, so perhaps that's something we can get our industry associations to have a look at. Well, it's time to take another break, but if you do have a question for us, give us a call and you might win one of Margaret's books. And tonight we're giving away How to Achieve Property Success. Call us on 1300 30 34 35 or email us at property@skynews.com.au with a question. and make sure you're watching at the end of the show to see if you're our winner. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Your Money, Your Call, and thanks for staying with us. Before we go to the phones again, I want to tell you about the Sydney Property Intensive that I'm part of and kicks off on the 28th of February in Sydney. Your regular host, Margaret Lomas, has handpicked a team of top property experts in Australia. And we'll be touring the country, starting off with Sydney, for a special event which we've called our one-day property intensive. This one-day seminar is designed to educate property investors regardless of where you are in your property investing journey. And unlike so many property seminars, we won't be selling any property or expensive education packages. All we'll be selling is our expertise for the day. It'll be a great day full of property education and giveaways, and with tickets at just $410, you can't afford to miss out. We'll only do this once a year, so go to yourpropertyteam.com.au now for your instant booking confirmation. Gentlemen, we get a lot of callers talking to us on this show about wanting information about property investing, and sadly some of them end up going to the seminars that are quite slick and involve some high pressure selling. Damian, have you had experiences with that sort of thing on behalf of any of your clients?
Yeah, look, unfortunately we have. We've seen people have come to do business with us, and they might have bought a property through one of these seminars, and sometimes they're horrified to see what the valuation comes in when they're trying to refinance it. So, look, my thoughts are obviously investors want to get education. Certainly be doing your homework. Who are the people behind it? You know, have they got good track record? They got satisfied clients. But importantly, if something's for sale on the night, then I'm very sceptical, because a professional service provider, they're certainly, like a lot of people do seminars, you're obviously doing them, we do them for our clients, but ultimately we're giving them education knowledge, and then yes, obviously there's a service they can use, but there's no high pressure sales tactics on the night. So if there's something on the night, you must get on the night, whether it be an education pack or some special discount, or alternatively they've got a property that all their seminar is just miraculously that property just happens to answer all the questions. I'd run a mile from it, because ultimately they've got a product to sell versus, you know, giving you information. So you never buy on the night. Always go, walk away, and if you still think it's a great thing to look at in a week later, well, then so be it. But I always say walk away on the night. Never buy anything on the night.
And Simon, what's your experience?
Oh, look, the common denominator for any trap in property investing is always the new property. Buyer beware anyone who's contemplating going to a seminar. As Damian said, often they sound very convincing the first half hour or so, and then towards the end they bring out the glossy brochures. It's just so easy to catch an investor out in property. Yeah. Jazz words such as population growth and infrastructure and a few graphs here and there, and you know, they think they've got this research.
And it's always when it comes time to settle off the plan or to refinance that you're going to find it's $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 underwater, and that hurts, doesn't it?
So the sad thing though, Michael, they don't always know that, because the way they structure the finance, often they've got finance associated with it, and they cross-collateralise. Yeah. Now, if you were buying a property and you had your own deposit and costs from maybe your home, and you're buying the property separately and separately financed, you would see the valuation coming in lower. But what they often do as part of their strategy is they cross-collateralise everything. So if you, let's say you had your house for $700,000, you had a $200,000 home loan, you bought this property and the val came in from 60, 70 under, you may not even know, because you've got that much equity in your home.
It's just not
so another reason you never ever cross-collateralise with these groups, because it doesn't become transparent as to the valuation of that property.
All right, well, some good advice there, and hopefully our viewers won't fall for that trap this year. Now, our next email is from Graham. Graham writes, I'm considering buying a 2-bedroom home unit in my self-managed superannuation fund that is in pension mode. Ideally, a unit in a small block, say 6 ground-level units. The areas I'm looking at are the Caloundra, Kawana and Toowoomba areas. Do you have a preference? All right, well, Damian, I wanted to bring that question to us tonight because it references the self-managed superannuation fund, which is something that no doubt both of you have had a lot of experience with. But Damian, tell us how people can use that for investing in property, and what are the tips and traps for that?
Actually, Simon and I were talking about that tonight. There has certainly been an increase in people using self-managed super funds to buy a property, and generally the structure it's set up is, if you're borrowing, of course, if you're buying it for cash, you can just buy it within the self-managed super fund itself. But if you're borrowing, you need to set up a limited recourse borrowing facility, and that's done through a separate bare trust holding, often with a separate, or always with a separate trustee, and generally most banks want a corporate trustee. So look, it can cost anywhere, if you've already got your super fund set up, can cost between another $4,000 and $8,000 to get the bare trust set up. The lending rates are a little bit higher. They've come down, but they're a little bit higher than you would on your conventional loan. But look, they can be right for the right client at the right stage of their life. So for myself in 40s, I wouldn't be doing it yet because...
don't look a day over 35.
Oh, good on you, Michael. Thanks for that. For me, myself, you know, with retirement a long, long way away still, and the fact is you can't gear against the property. That's the important thing. For someone building a portfolio, most people generate the additional equity through capital growth. Great in the super fund, you get capital growth, but you can't borrow against that. You can only borrow to acquire, and you can refinance the loans if necessary, but you can't borrow against that to increase in the value. So it's very much your last property strategy in my mind. So the clients we've had who've been using it have been in their 50s. They go salary sacrifice. The good thing about it is you can pay off your principal off the loan, effectively tax deductible by salary sacrificing. But again, the important thing is it's got to be right for you at the right stage of your life, and also make sure you go and seek advice from someone who's not against properties, a planner who knows.
Hard to find.
Sometimes it's hard to find,
Very
but
hard to
go
find.
Talk to someone who knows, understands it, not biased against property, and see if it's right for you at that right stage of your life.
Simon, is it a strategy that you're using in your practice?
Oh, look, I've personally got a self-managed superannuation fund, and we've helped plenty of property investors with the acquisition of their property. I think it's fantastic that through self-managed super, a lot more Australians are taking an active interest in their retirement. Whereas without self-managed super, superannuation was that annual statement we got that we just threw in a drawer and had no interest in. However, a lot of people are setting up self-managed superannuation funds with very little knowledge about property markets and still buying a dud asset. The fundamentals of buying a really good investment asset don't change whether it's inside super or outside super.
And I've got a view that when the government starts to want to regulate the property market more, that they're going to have a real good look at the self-managed superannuation fund investment strategies in property, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see some discussion this year or next about that being watched. I know the Reserve Bank, if you read the Reserve Bank statements, they're concerned about the amount of money pouring into property through that avenue, and whilst it's unlikely that that would ever be retrospective, that they'd unwind that, it might not be something that's here forever.
The Murray inquiry did recommend that they perhaps look at curtailing it.
And if you look at curtailing that compared with the political ramifications of curtailing negative gearing, it's a no-brainer that they'll regulate the superannuation fund before they touch anything else. All right, well, we have a caller on the line. William, are you with us tonight?
How are you? Yes, I'm with you.
Good. We're having a patchy night and getting our callers to hold on, so thanks for doing that.
Right.
How can we help you?
I got a unit in Atwood, Victoria. I paid $389 for it, 3-bedroom, 2 bathrooms and 3 toilets, and it's very nice, brand new, on 238 square metres of land. But when you were talking about units before and apartments, aren't they totally two different things?
Well, look, yeah, the terminology is interchangeable, I suppose. The word apartment is American in its application to what they would call condominium living. So the terms units and apartments are used interchangeably. I suppose some would say that the general distinction is a unit, which is a high-rise, and perhaps a townhouse, which is, you know, more representative of something on flat land. But look, all of those terms are used interchangeably, and what's important is that you've got to look at the plans and understand what you've bought. So it sounds like you've got yourself quite a large apartment, and whether it's called a unit or whether it's called an apartment is really not to the point. When you go to the Act, if you're looking at the law on any point, or if you're looking at the websites, make sure that you have a look at the proper terminology in your state, and that will help you understand exactly what you own. All right, James. Hello, James. You're from Sydney.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I am 45. I live and work in Auckland. I've got a house there which is fully paid off. I've got 2 investment properties in Sydney, one in Hunters Hill and one in Surrey Hills, and both are rented. And I'm easily able to pay the mortgage. Now I'm thinking of investing in an apartment building in Perth facing the Swan River. Apparently it's going to be built next to this Ritz-Carlton, and I'm thinking of buying it off the plan. This is on the 10th floor, worth about 1.3 million, and the down payment is 10%, and then we pay the balance in 3 years' time. Should I buy it there, or should I buy another property in Sydney?
All right, and the $1.3 million property that you're looking at buying is for an investment as opposed to a place of residence?
Yeah, investment, yeah.
All right, well, I'm sure we've got some advice there. We've got our leading commentator on the Perth market with us tonight. Damian, it's your hometown, so lead us off in the discussion.
Oh, well, James, so I know the area that you're talking about. So for the viewers, Perth's quite a significant redevelopment, Elizabeth Quay, where they're building, basically cutting out a lot of the land and letting the river come into it and bringing basically the river back to the city. So in terms of location, it's an outstanding location. It's obviously right on the waterfront there. And so with apartments that are unique and in some respects irreplaceable, which is waterfront type properties, certainly they're going to be in high demand. You see around Sydney the waterfront properties do particularly well and certainly have performed strongly in terms of capital growth. Not all of them, but certainly that's a good factor for it. But however, from an investment point of view, 1.3 is a lot of money. Yes, you're not settling for 3 years, but your rental yields are going to be pretty ordinary. At the moment in Perth, the inner city apartment market is pretty soft. We've seen that rents have come back 15% in some cases. And the yield, even in a strong market, you just don't get the yield on those sort of $1.3 million properties. You might get $800 a week. That's pretty poor yield. If I was buying an investment property, I'd be looking at maybe 3 at $450 each, rather than buying one at $1.3 million.
Yeah. And Simon?
I definitely agree with Damien in terms of not spending $1.3 million, whether it's Perth, Sydney, wherever you wish. Multiple properties there, at least 3, I would have thought. Our outlook on the Perth market, I actually, sorry, Damien, but I think Perth may actually go backwards in 2015, largely due to the downturn of iron ore and a lot of job losses that Perth's already seen. And a lot of extra supply coming on the market. James, you mentioned you already own 2 properties in Sydney. Australia's a big place. You've got 9.6 million properties to pick from. So far you've mentioned 2 cities, so I'd encourage you to really widen your net. With $1.3 million capacity, you can invest in all sorts of locations.
Yeah, and look, I'd add to that, James, when buying off the plan, you need to be very careful about a whole range of things. Firstly, the quality of the person that is behind the property, and look at their track record. Most states in Australia will not have insurance and home warranties that protect you on something which is 10 stories or more. So be careful about who you're buying from. I don't know who is behind this development, and I don't need to know. It's general advice that you should really look at the pedigree of the developer. You'll also find that there'll be very little flexibility in changing any of the terms of the contract. So the contract will be thick and oppressive, and you're probably going to ask some poor conveyancer or solicitor to do it for $800 or $900, and nobody is going to read the contract for that price. So make sure that you go to see a solicitor who is going to read the contract and explain to you what you're buying and what are the rules and the regulations that are going to apply to that property. The Western Australian strata title property laws, as Damien reminded me before the show, are under review at the moment. They haven't been reviewed since 1985, so by the time this property comes onto the market, there'll be a new set of laws applicable to strata title property in Western Australia. It's worth getting some advice on that. So off-the-plan purchasing can be a good opportunity, but it can also be a real problem for people. There's hardly a building, there's hardly a high-rise built in this country at the moment that doesn't suffer from significant building defects within the first couple of years of being built. So be very careful what you're buying, how it's being put together, and what are the plans and the specifications, so that you know exactly what you're getting when it does come time. But hopefully you'll take the advice of the panel and look elsewhere for a better diversified group of properties that isn't going to put $1.3 million at risk on one particular investment. I hope that helps you. This is Your Money, Your Call, and we're going to take a short break. But when we return, you'll have another chance to get a copy of Margaret's book, How to Achieve Property Success, by calling now on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'm Michael Teys, and with me tonight is buyer's agent Simon Pressley from Propertyology and Damian Collins of Momentum Wealth. If you have a question for us, call us now on 1300 30 34 35 and we'll do our best to fit you in, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. Now, Paul, you're calling from Melbourne. Hello, how are you?
Hello, Mr. Teys. May I call you...
You can call me whatever you
Michael.
like, Paul.
Thank you, Michael. I will call you Michael, and thank you, the rest of the panel. It's a great show.
Thank you.
And my question is crosses over a few issues. I was lucky enough to be at a mortgagees auction only in recent months, and I was the successful buyer after the property went onto the market as such, when it was announced that a certain price was achieved, and the particular bank in possession, pursuant to mortgage, allowed it to go, and it looked like a good buy at the time, and so I kept going a little bit further up, but unfortunately kept going and kept going and kept going. But it's a very, very prestigious property, and it was just under $1 million, and I was, as I say, the successful bidder, and the agents were very thrilled because they got a brilliant outcome and everybody was happy. And I thought, well, I'm a little bit nervous because I paid just under $1 million for a real estate property, but we got a magnificent phone call just shortly after the that process, and they said, look, we've got a wonderful offer for a tenancy. I was hoping to have it as a negative gearing proposal over a few years, and it would be a wonderful project, and I thought I could manage it overall, and I had everything worked out, and it was all approved by the bank, so everything was working happily. And then I got a 5-year tenancy, which is very rare, as we all know, in tenancy arrangements. And when the agents proposed this, I said, wow, this has turned out not a negative gearing proposal, it's turned out to be a positive gearing proposal.
What a shame, you've made some money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
so now I think I'll be contributing a little bit to the Victorian budget, and hopefully we might be able to make some decisions about positive gearing for them, and I won't be one of those people that would be taking away some money from the budget outcome.
Right. Well, let's get some advice from Damian, who's our recovering accountant on the panel.
Okay. Well, the core questions revolve around: should I just bite the bullet and rent the property over a 3 to 5 year plan, or should I consider the next one that came up? There was a very good proposal that came up from the agents saying, look, we've had another really great development in this. You've just paid just under $1 million. It was rounded off at just around 980. Then he said, look, we've got an offer of $1.2 million as an offer on the property.
All right, well, let's see what the panel's got to say about Paul's situation. Paul likes a yarn, likes to tell a story, tells a good story, and sounds like he's had some good fortune there. Damian, you buy it for $980,000, you sell it for 1.2 within months. What are the tax implications of that for Paul? Now, we can't give specific advice, but generally speaking, if we're looking at short-term flipping of properties, what's the tax implications?
Paul, you would, even though you bought it for investment purposes, you would be subject to the capital gains regime, but because you've sold it within 12 months, there is no discount to the capital gains rate. So the full gain after expenses, so after your stamp duty on the way in and your selling fees on the way out, are going to be subject to your marginal tax rate. So you said 980, you're selling at 1.2. Let's say we have 65 in expenses. You're still going to be up about 150, and depending on your tax rate, you could be up for nearly half of that in tax. So so I'd be certainly thinking about holding it for 12 months, and it's the contract date that's relevant, not the settlement date. So always be aware it's the contract date that you should be thinking about, and so you could be up for quite a substantial tax bill.
All right, Simon, what about a 5-year tenancy?
5-year tenancy, you'd be a bit wary about that. I guess you've got secure income for 5 years, which you really would have multiple tenants over 5 years without some vacancy in there. That's the good thing. However, if rents were to increase over that 5-year period, unless you specifically write something in that tenancy right from the outset to give you provision to adjust those, you're going to miss out on that. If it turns out it hasn't been the best tenant, it's 5 years of pain you need to put up with as well. So a really good property manager will be the best person to guide you on that, though. But 5 years, I would have thought.
It's a big ask, isn't it? And particularly in Australia, where vacancy rates sit somewhere between 1% and 5%, it's not a huge issue, is it?
No.
Most of the time, if you're meeting the market and being sensible about the rentals that you're seeking, you're going to find a tenant, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I noticed Margaret during the week issued a tweet saying, drop your, if you're having trouble finding a tenant, drop your price by $5 every day until you meet the market. I thought it was excellent advice because you're better off taking that tenant at a modest rent than having a 1 or 2 or 4 week or no income at all. So I'd be careful about a 5-year lease. I think from the tenant's point of view it's fabulous, but not so much from the property owner's point of view. So maybe breaking that down into some options or something like that might be good for Paul. Damian, Paul's had a windfall. He's bought well. There's an offer out there which presumably represents market value. How else could he use that equity to develop an investing strategy? By keeping the property, not paying the tax, the capital gains tax, but also accessing the wealth that he's created in that property purchase to do something else.
Yeah, and look, it was also interesting. He's worried about positive gearing. I wish all my properties were positively geared. I think that's something people talk about, that they want. Positive gearing is good for your properties. But look, one of the things he could certainly do would be looking at leveraging against that gain. Now, of course, he needs a valuer to say that it's worth 1.2. That's the problem. You might find valuers may not value it that quickly at a higher price, but look, that gain can be used to borrow against to buy more properties.
All right, well, that's good news for Paul. And Paul, I hope that that information that we've given you helps you make the most of the situation that you find yourself in. Well, we're almost out of time, and I hope you've enjoyed our show this week. Thanks also to all our callers. This week, our question of the week goes to James, and although James is an experienced property investor, we think that he could really get some benefit from Margaret's book. So, James, if you could email us on your money, your call at destiny.com.au, Margaret will send you your book. Thank you to our guests, Simon Pressley and Damian Collins. Before we go, one more reminder to go to yourpropertyteam.com.au to get your tickets now for our one-day property intensive in Sydney on 28 February 2015. I'll be back on the show soon, and in the meantime you can follow me on Twitter at Michael Teys, and you make sure that you check out my new website, blockstrata.com.au. Thanks for being with us, and good night.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.